Hey there, welcome to LSAT Demon Daily. I'm Erik Johansson, a teacher with LSAT Demon. Joining me today is LSAT Demon student Nikki, who just basically sprinted through your LSAT study and made a 20-point improvement and crushed it on the January test. Congratulations, and thanks for joining me.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. This podcast was a huge part of my journey, so it's exciting to be on the other side of it.
Yeah, did you discover the podcast right when you were starting your LSAT prep?
Pretty much. I have a long commute to work, about an hour, and I normally listen to podcasts. So as soon as I started studying, I thought maybe there's a way I can study on my way to work. Found the podcast, and that was that.
Cool. And you started not that long ago. You were one of the lucky ones who was able to kind of power through and not spend a ton of time on the LSAT. So tell me about when you started and how you started.
Yeah, absolutely. So I work in a career that's very, very unrelated to law. So I'm currently working in quantitative equity. And I'd always kind of had law school in the back of my mind, but it seems like a big risk to step away from a career that, you have your feet planted in. But in the fall, I went to go visit one of my best friends from my undergrad who currently attends law school at the University of Oregon. And I just followed her around for a weekend, pretended I was in law school too, and realized I loved it. So that was,
Yeah, what about that did you love?
I think, she started giving me her readings as a joke to be like, oh, look what I have to go through. And I started reading, I think, some of her torts cases. And I was like, no, I love this. Like, this is some drama. Let me read more.
Yeah, torts in particular, I imagine you can get some wild stories.
Yeah. So I had a lot of fun doing that for the weekend. And then I was driving back up with my mom. We had about a 10-hour car ride. And I just, you know, worked through it in my head of whether this could be possible, looked up the application date for the school that I was interested in applying to, realized it was 2 weeks away and I could take the January LSAT. And so I thought, okay, might as well give it a go, see what happens.
So wait, you made that decision 2 weeks out from the January LSAT, but wait,
No,
you're
2 weeks from the application deadline
from
for
the
the school.
application deadline,
Yeah.
right? Okay,
Yeah,
gotcha.
maybe 3 weeks.
Okay, so you made the decision to jump in, start studying. Did you kick it off with a diagnostic?
I did. I actually took one that weekend in Oregon with my friend, but I took all the sections separately. I didn't take them back to back, but I kind of did it over one day. And that diagnostic was actually a 157.
157, great place to start. And you must have felt like, I mean, that was with no LSAT prep or anything at that point.
No Elsa, I didn't even know what the sections were.
So but you went in and felt like it was pretty intuitive for you, I imagine.
Yeah, I think the logic games would have been better for me. I'd seen them before. I'd actually taught that same friend how to do them when she was studying for the LSAT
Oh,
because I did a
really?
math degree. So I was quite familiar with like formal logic and how to set up, like the structure of a question. I don't know if I was actually very helpful to her, but I was familiar with that part, which was then taken away.
So you were teaching logic games to your LSAT studying friend, even though you yourself had no experience with the LSAT. That's wild. I wonder how your approach to the games would have compared to ours. I don't know if you've seen any of our old approach to logic games, and I'm just, yeah, fascinating.
Yeah, but I was always one of those kids that loved doing Sudoku, loved doing, those little books that are like the Sudoku ones, and they have the logic puzzle where it's like if Mary sits next to Sam, then Richard's 2 seats away. Like, I always loved those.
Yeah. Well, regardless, that kind of thinking and that's I think you recognize that logical reasoning comprehension, there's still a puzzle element to it. So I don't doubt that you benefited from that experience. Did you find that unpacking an argument in LR was not that dissimilar?
Yeah, I found that part pretty intuitive, especially when it came to must be true questions or the ones that were a little bit more similar to formal logic. At the start, I really, really struggled with the questions that took it one step away and had some generalization, like the principal question. I was like, oh no, this is subjective. Like, I can't get to an answer if it's subjective. It's just a guessing game now, which is definitely not true, which I figured out from this podcast.
Yeah, not subjective. There is one correct answer, and you can solve every question definitively. So it sounds like you learned that lesson pretty quickly.
I did, yes, and it
Yeah.
was very helpful to learn.
What else did you learn early on that helped your LSAT study take off?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned this to you briefly before we started, but there was one tip that really stuck with me and I think locked in the rest of the test when I was studying. But I remember, I think Nate saying at some point, if you're in LA, then you are always in California. But if you're in California, you're not always in LA. And that really stuck with me. I have this distinct memory of working that out in my own city when I was a kid with my uncle and being like, well, but you live in this city, so you live in this province, but you could also live in this province but not live in this city. So how do I write down the address when I'm mailing something on an envelope? And I distinctly remember that and hearing Nate bring it back, I was like, well, this test is easy now. I can figure it out from here.
Yeah, just common sense, and that is, as listeners should know, just the distinguishing sufficient and necessary, and our common sense way of illustrating that. But that concept comes up again and again and again on the LSAT, and if you can just break it down in those terms, much easier than trying to tackle it in terms of contrapositives and
Absolutely. I remember I briefly tried watching some YouTube videos from a different study company, and they were into identifying what is the necessary clause, what is the sufficient clause. I never figured that out. I still don't know which clause is which clause and how to do that, but I just understand it in my head. Once you hear if you're in
yeah,
LA, you're in California, then it makes sense.
totally. Okay, so what did your study look like? Was it every day consistent, an hour, 2 hours? How were you approaching your study plan?
Yeah, so pretty much from the get go, I found on the Demon website there's a page with a sample study plan. And I did not follow it, but I just saw it said you can fit in 1 hour a day and you'll be fine. And I thought, okay, with my work schedule, that makes sense. I work in finance right now, so obviously my hours are a little longer. A week is typically like 60 hours, and my commute's pretty long. So I was like, how am I going to fit in studying for this? And when I saw, okay, you can just do an hour a day, took a deep breath, realized it would be fine. I think at the start, I was pretty focused on drilling for logical reasoning. And I'll just preface this, which with when I took my diagnostic reading comp, it was like a -3, -4 maybe. And so in my head, I was like, okay, well, I don't need to study this. I'll just put this on the back burner. My target score when I started studying, I think was a 166. So I knew like if I can just increase the logical reasoning a little bit, then it'll be fine. So I drilled logical reasoning, and then I was taking a practice test every weekend. And I think within the first week, the first one I took on the Demon, I think I got a 154, which seems like normal variance to me. And then, yeah, within a week, I think it was at like 161 to 163, just with understanding a little bit more of the logical reasoning. And then I switched to doing maybe 3 timed sections a week. And then, other than that, just using the drilling. Started drilling on my way to work, on the bus, on the way home, when I was waiting for the bus, just whenever you can fit in a question.
Yeah, that I have found that the mobile app is really useful for that. You can just pull out your phone and drill one LR question, one or two. Yeah.
Yeah, if anyone doesn't have the app, make sure you download it because if you get to class 5 minutes early, that's time you can do one question. If you're waiting for your dinner to cook and you're standing stirring it, you only need one hand to stir. You can use your other hand to study.
Good point. Okay. You mentioned 166 was your goal score. Is that just based on the school that you were interested in?
Yeah, so I'm in Canada. I think the highest median LSAT at the Canadian schools is maybe 166, 167. So that's what I was aiming for. I had pretty good grades from my undergrad, and I knew they were above all the medians of the school I would apply to. So I was just kind of aiming for the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And I figured, there's huge variance, right? Like you never know where you're going to get to. But from what I'd heard on the podcast, which is wherever your practice test range is, you're going to score there on your test day. And
Mm-hmm.
so I was like, well, as long as I get my range to that area, it'll be close enough. And that's what I went for.
At what point did you know that you were safe, that you were going to hit that score?
I think I hit that score in maybe my second week of studying, third week. And so by then I was like, okay, well, I still have another 5 or 6 weeks until I'm actually taking the test. Like, I just need to be able to do it consistently. And so then that was key for me is like, how can I be 100% sure I will get at least this score? And I figured if I'm improving doing what I'm doing, I'll just keep doing it.
And you did. January, you took the test and everything went well, huh?
It did. I got my score back. It was a 174, and that was pretty in line with the practice test I was getting around that point. I was, yeah, anywhere from like a 171 to a 179 on the practice tests leading up to that. And I'd gotten a 179 on the last practice test I took the week before. So in my head, I was like, okay, you can just calm down. You'll get a
Huge,
166.
huge confidence boost, I'm sure. And I imagine that having that goal score of a 166 that you had already blown by, it probably helped calm you down and give you confidence on test day to know that the school that you were targeting, like, you didn't even need to score the middle of your range. You could score at the low end of your range and still be fine at that point. So you weren't trying to do too much on test day. Just go in and be calm, do what you needed to do.
Yeah, I think also like I studied math and economics in my undergrad. I read half of one paper and I wrote one paper in the 5 years it took me to do that degree, but I wrote hundreds and hundreds of tests. So tests not unfamiliar to me, 3 hour, 4 hour tests not unfamiliar to me. So
Mm-hmm.
I had no test anxiety. I knew I wanted to go to a test center. I'm used to taking a test with people coughing, sneezing, talking to the professor. Like, yeah, that was just pretty standard.
No big issues on test day with any logistics like that.
No, I think going to the center for me was great because I'm always worried something's going to go wrong on my computer. Like when I tried to do the argumentative writing, it took me so long to get it
Mm-hmm.
all set up. And yeah, going to the test center, you just show up. I think I showed up 45 minutes early because I was worried about being late, and they just had me start when I got there, which
Mm-hmm.
was great. So finished early, and yeah, no issues. I can't say enough good things about the center I went to.
Well, I feel like we've painted this picture of your LSAT journey being completely smooth with no bumps in the road, but that can't be totally true. Were there any challenges that you can think of? I mean, we talked about learning the lesson about sufficient and necessary, but were there any real lessons that you needed to learn or big hurdles to jump on the way?
Yeah, so I think my first diagnostic, reading comp, smooth, no problem. Next one I took, that 154, my logical reasoning improved, and the reading comp was like negative 12 or something. I hadn't been used to reading in a long time. I didn't take a degree that involved reading. And so, the books I read for fun are not mentally challenging at all. So that was definitely kind of a wake up call to me. But I didn't really practice reading comprehension by studying for the LSAT. In my job right now, I read a lot of academic literature, and I had found it really challenging in my job to read academic literature. It was taking me forever to get through a paper when I saw other people breezing through them. So I took some of the lessons I heard from the podcast of like read one sentence at a time. If you are stuck on a sentence, do not move on because you will be more confused moving forward. And that helped me in my job a lot. And
Yeah.
then, yeah, I think I'm more practiced through the work I do than through reading comprehension training specifically for the LSAT. But yeah, I saw that go pretty
I
downhill.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, you were practicing the LSAT when you weren't practicing the LSAT.
I code a lot for work too. Like a lot of my job is programming, and I think that's quite logical as well. And very much like, I mean, it sounds abstract to say you're setting up an argument, but you are. You're just arguing with a computer. And that's how I feel every day when I'm frustrated with what I'm doing not working.
Yeah, you have to be extremely precise with the commands that you're giving. And if something isn't working, it's generally your fault because you didn't write something as precisely as you needed to.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
So I think just understanding that, all the skills you have in different areas are more related than you think they are.
totally. I think that's also great advice for anyone who's in school right now because you might be in a degree, or I mean, if you're in school, you're going to be doing reading and you have the opportunity to actually take that reading seriously. There's a lot of reading in school that you can do by skimming, looking up the spark notes, whatever it is. But yeah, can you actually use those classes and that reading as an opportunity to practice careful, focused reading? Um, Yeah, love that.
Definitely. I also really struggled with the philosophy passages, which I think is kind of random. But I found that language very, very difficult. And every time I had a passage like that, it was bad. That's all I can say. It was bad. And I didn't have one on my actual test, which was great. I was scouring Reddit after, like one does after taking the LSAT, and I saw a lot of people complaining about a particular passage that, for me had been no issue. I think just because I'm very, very familiar with the content of that passage. It was on US versus Canadian banking regulations, and I work in Canadian finance and I studied economics a little bit. So for me,
Yeah,
that was okay.
nice. I think that's also a good takeaway for listeners to know that on any given day of taking an LSAT, you might run into something that just doesn't click with your brain in that moment. I mean, you should expect that you can figure it out, but you're going to get unlucky on some days with just content that doesn't quite click. Sounds like you got lucky. So I think you're just going to sit on this first LSAT score, but others should be ready to take the test multiple times. So hopefully they don't run into one on international banking the next time around, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's why there is score variance, right? Like sometimes you're going to
Yeah.
get questions you can solve and passages that you do deeply understand the first time you read it. And sometimes you don't. And that's why you have variance. And that's why it's great that you can take the test multiple times.
Great. So what's next for you?
I'm waiting to hear back. So I did a very, very undemon way of my law school application process. I applied at the very last minute to one school and one school only, and wrote the last LSAT I could take for that school and wrote it one time. So this is not what I recommend. Don't do that. Listen to the podcast. That's not how you should be applying to law school, but it's what I did. I'm waiting to hear back, and my fingers are crossed.
I think in your case, it's maybe a little different because you're in Canada, because you want to stay in your city, and this one school is very good, and it is the school to go to work in this one city. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. So Canada obviously is massive. It's bigger than the US. And I don't know how many law schools we have off the top of my head, but I can tell you in my province, which is big, I don't know. Maybe it's bigger than California, not people wise, but area wise.
Mm-hmm.
There are 3 law schools. 2 of them are good, one of them is bad. And the one in my city is the best one. And so I'm hoping to work here after I graduate. And so for me, it just made sense. The only other school that I think would be considered better is 7-hour plane ride. So I wasn't interested in that.
You're also not expecting to pay the many tens of thousands of dollars that U.S. law schools charge, huh?
No, so very different system up here. I do believe some of the law schools in Ontario, so that's the area kind of north of New York, and where Canada's biggest city is, have more expensive tuitions, maybe around 30 to 40,000 Canadian. And you can divide that by 1.5 to get it in US dollars right now. Unfortunately for me,
Mm.
our currency is not doing so hot. But the law schools in my area, I think, charge up to 14,000, which is around 9,000 US dollars a year. And they do still give scholarships on top of that. So
Wow.
tuition is definitely not so much a consideration in Canada. And then same thing with there being so few law schools. There's not this whole intense ranking thing. They're much more localized. So if you want to work on the West Coast, which is where I want to work, you have a handful of schools to choose from. And if you want to work out east and you're in Toronto, there's more schools because there's more people, but still there's not this intense ranking system, and they are quite localized.
You are podcast listeners, so you probably know more about the application process for United States law schools than I know about the app process for Canadian law schools. Do you have a sense of the difference, like what it was that you had to do for your application that might have been different? Because you didn't have to go through like LSAC and create an account and do it through. It was just an individual application directly with the law school.
For me, it was. I think if you are in Ontario, and there might be 5 or 6 to 10, I honestly don't know how many schools there are there. But they have something called OLSAS. I don't know what that stands for either, but I think you have to do something similar through them where they will standardize everybody's GPA, and then standardize your LSAT and spit it back out to the schools. But if you're going any of the schools outside of Ontario, it's an individual application to that school. Part of my application was I had to manually enter every grade I'd gotten in every class I'd taken,
Oh
which I
man.
then had to double check 3 times to make sure I hadn't put any typos in there because that's how they were going to calculate my GPA, is based off of what I put in.
Wow.
Another thing in Canada is there is no standardized GPA system. So my undergraduate institution was on a 9.0 scale, which I don't think you have.
Not. I have never heard of that. No, sounds impressive though. He could. Yeah, my GPA was a 8.7. No big deal.
Yeah, out of 4.3, no problem. Yeah, and then the university I applied to for law school is on a percentage system. So you get a percentage
Okay.
out of 100 in your class. And I happened to have both on my transcript, which was great because, for every GPA scale, say an A is a 85 to an 89 in the course, but it translates to a 4 or a 4.3 or an 8, like depending on the school. But you could get an 89. You're very close to getting an A plus,
Hmm.
but it just doesn't translate. So having the percentage application system obviously was a big boost. But yeah, depending what undergraduate school you go to, totally different GPA system. And I think it cost me $10 to send my transcript over. You maybe write 1 page in response to some questions, and that's it. And they get your LSAT score.
Besides having to enter in all of your grades individually, that sounds nicer. Well, best of luck with that application. Do let us know how that goes. And again, congrats on your success. Well done. Is there any final advice that you'd like to give our listener? Something, I don't know, you can always return to LA and California, but some lesson that you wish you'd known maybe a little bit earlier in your LSAT study process?
Yeah, I think, like we mentioned, just that every question is solvable. Every question has a right answer. There's 5 choices, 4 of them are wrong. So be dismissive. I definitely did the slow down to speed up when I started studying, and I would do maybe 15 questions in a section. And the only way to go faster is by dismissing the wrong answers quicker, but you cannot read the, chunk of question any faster. You need to slow down and take the time you need. And you need to be 100% sure that your right answer is right, but you can very quickly tell if a wrong answer is wrong.
Totally. Thanks, Nikki. It was a treat getting to meet you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you as well. Good luck to everybody who's on their journey.
Email daily at lsatdemon.com if you'd like to ask us a question or share some LSAT or law school admissions news. Thanks for listening.